I think I'm recording. It's live, it's live, it's live. It started. Hooray. So, Fiona Harrold with Inspire Me podcast, the first one. Whoa, I'm so excited. And I couldn't be more excited to welcome today's first guest to the podcast. This is a man who caused a sensation on social media when I shared his story last week. I'm going to bring him up in a second. So he is Alan Mash. And I first came across Alan 24 years ago. Be Your Own Life Coach had just come out. And shortly after that, I received a letter from a man in prison saying, hey, thank you so much for your book. It's so useful for me. I'm actually using it to coach everyone else on the wing. Would you ever consider paying a visit? That visit led to the UK's first coach training program for prison officers. And this man who I want you to meet today has truly transformed his life. Nowadays, he coaches the good and the great business leaders across the world. He is a motivational speaker across the world. He works with people like Bono and Gabriel on their environmental initiatives. I mean, his life is, it's an enviable life, right? It's a great life. But what's interesting is that he came 24 years ago from a very different place. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Alan and I'm going to ask him his first question. So Alan, welcome. I'm so thrilled that you're making the time to see us today. I know you're a crazy busy person, always on the road.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm really glad to be here. Really pleased.
So what I should have said is that in the 90s, you were one of those, probably a yuppie, right? Anybody remember the yuppies, the 1990s? Because there you were on a huge salary, working in the city of London, living the life. And let's tell people, what happened, because I want people to understand that, what the crime was that you served a sentence for. So just in your own words, what was the crime?
Yeah, so I was investigated and charged with theft and fraud. Not business related, I might add. But yes, I went to court. It took about a year. And then I was convicted and spent my first night at Brixton.
Wow. And then you subsequently went on and had a sentence of, was it 3 years, Alan?
Yep, 3 years, of which the majority of it was played out at an open prison on the Isle of Sheppey, which is Stamford Hill, which is where we met.
Which is where we met, absolutely. So I should also say that subsequently, recently, one of those chief witnesses has come forward and spoken to your barrister and actually said that there was pressure on him to give evidence against you. So let's just put that out there. And you, because you have moved on so much in your life, have chosen not to go down that route of seeking a retrial.
Yeah, I mean, the way that the justice system works is it would have to go back to the Crown Prosecution Service. They have come forward and said they didn't entirely tell the truth. There would then have to be a decision made as to whether or not that would be justified and whether or not it's a good use of time. I just can't see the point in it. Yes, if I thought that it would change my life now, maybe, but actually I just can't see the point of it. So I have chosen to let that go. But as I said to you, that's now a whole part of a secondary review, and the legal team will be looking at that and make their decisions. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm leaving it there, and that's my sort of take on it.
Yeah. So here's a question that I have, and I'm sure other people have too. First of all, you come across, people can see it straight away, as this incredibly positive person. And you have turned your life around and you live the most incredible life these days. But how was it when you realized, and when was the time that you realized that your life was going to change, and that
Mm.
that incredible life that you did have in the 90s in the city of London and all of that, when was your lowest point? Because there must have been a point when you realized your life was gonna change.
Yeah, I suppose I don't think this is just about me, actually. I think it's also about other people that are in the system. Um, I'm I'm not a member of the revolving door, which is a term that people tend to use for people that sort of spend their life going in and out of prison. Um, I was going there. I knew I was going, and I knew that that was most probably going to be. I think my family um, were more worried about it than I was. For me, after going through a year um, of various court cases and adjournments and court cases and adjournments, there's a certain relief about going to Crown Court and the thing coming to a conclusion. The lowest point is definitely not your first day. The lowest point is most probably when reality hits, which is usually about between 3 and 6 months on,
So
where
when was
you
the lowest point? When are you saying it wasn't when on your first night or your first day?
no, not at all. There's a relief that that the thing is over, because of course the English justice system runs on the fact that your sentence is your punishment. And then from then on, it's all about rehabilitation. That's the supposed thing. But
Mhm.
of course, that isn't always the case. But I'd say it's about 3 or 6 months in where you suddenly realize that Christmas is going to be in prison, your birthday is going to be in prison. So yeah, so that's really when all that starts. So it's about 6 months in. So I'd say it's most probably after I'd spent my first Christmas. It will be at about the February or the March, where you know you've still got another year at least before you're going to be out walking the streets.
Got it. What was the worst feeling that you had? Because prison is, I mean, I can only imagine it must feel like a sort of humiliation, a fall from grace, especially for someone like you who was, living the high life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I mean, I think humiliation is a. I think you feel for others and how they feel about you and how they approach the questions from your family about where are you, where have you gone to, and how are things. So you feel for them, but for me, no, there wasn't. I decided that um, from pretty early on, really, that I was going to make sure that something positive came from all of
Mm,
it,
mm,
um, and that was basically what I did. I set out to make a positive change. You don't do that overnight.
mm.
You speak to others, and you know what? That's the big thing about being in prison. Are other people. You start to listen to them, and you start to take some feedback from why they're there, and how their lives have changed. And you suddenly realise there are lots of things going on that to all intents and purposes, you're pretty lucky. You can read, you can write. There are lots of people there that can't read, can't write, um, and that you know. And how do they look forward? That's the big problem. How do they look forward? So you sort of start to take this role on of helping people read, helping people write their letters, and that's where the first change starts to come from. Really,
I mean, what
it's
I just heard you say, Alan, let me ask you about that. It sounds like at one point you made a decision
yes.
that this experience was gonna be a particular way, or you were gonna make this experience a particular way. So when did you make that decision? Tell me about that decision.
Right. I actually made that decision most probably 6 months before I went in.
because it was obvious that that was going to happen,
because
right?
it was obvious that was going to happen. So I'd made that decision, and I'd sort of told myself that that was what was going to happen. So I had to go in prepared. There's a whole big thing about people before they go in being told by their legal team. Usually, you make sure you bring your bag with you.
Mhm.
Because your first night you won't have a change of clothes. You need a toothbrush. You can't take toothpaste in, but there are lots of things that you're going to need. So take them with you. Take pictures, take photos, take a book, and that's really when you start to realize that something's going to change your life. And yeah, so that decision I sort of made before I got there. So once I'd got there, over about the sort of 5, 6, 7 month period, you start then to rebuild to coming out. And I was pretty lucky, really, because
So, Alan,
um,
hold on a second. What was the decision?
the
What was the
decision was the decision was that I was going to make this experience something that could be positive, not just for me but for others.
God,
And
oh my, incredible.
that was my decision.
That's
Um,
amazing. Listen, I've just got to say one thing to you, and I'm sure other people are thinking it too. You know, when people are faced with a fall from grace like that, very often, Alan, they don't make a decision like that. They don't take a route like that. You know, I remember in the recession of 2008, hearing about this banker, this high flying banker from the city of London, who had been made redundant, and he'd gone missing for a couple of days. Now, the fact was, this guy was not in any financial danger whatsoever. He actually had an estate, I think, in Scotland, you know, a big house, townhouse in Clapham in London. And unfortunately, however he interpreted that fall from grace, he was found in his own woods with a shotgun 5 days later.
yeah,
So I mean, really, I take my hat off to you for making that decision at that time. And yeah, so the decision must have put you on a certain course of action then.
yeah, it does. Um, and the course of action isn't necessarily um, there isn't a single course of action. There are a
Yeah.
number of things that you look at. I mean, that banker that's a terrible story, and I remember, but you must remember where I went. Um, Before me had gone lords, peers, MPs, who are now back serving in the House of Lords. And serving on, actually, they're all in the House of Lords. One has passed away, but um,
I'm thinking Jonathan Aitken.
Jonathan Aitken,
Wow.
Jeffrey Archer.
Wow.
You see, so actually, you have to go in and think like Jeffrey, if you're like. That's the big thing.
Tell us more about that. How do you think like Jeffrey? How do you think like Jeffrey Archer? How would he
Um,
think?
do you know the strange thing is I needed to think like Jeffrey, so I read a couple of his books, which, as you know, are all a lot of crime related books.
Yeah.
Um,
Hold
so
on a second. When you say you needed to think like Jeffrey, what do you mean by that?
well, you basically have to have a mindset that says what's going on or what was going on in his head,
Which
um, which
does
undoubtedly he knew what he'd done. He knew he was going to prison, and he went to prison. But once he'd got there, he carried on being Jeffrey Archer. That was
I'm sure everybody knows who Jeffrey Archer is, but for anyone who's under the age of 30, they might not. So he, at the time, was probably the biggest selling author in the UK and
yes.
huge bestseller across the world. Um, and he had a phenomenal fall from grace. What was the actual reason, Alan? You
Do you know
remember?
what? This is one of the really strange things about all of this.
Mm.
I can't remember, but I'm sure it's to do with um, something along the lines of payment for questions and payment for information. I'm sure it was something like that. And I think that his conviction was based around the fact that that he didn't actually tell the court the truth. That was
That's it. Perjury.
and I, and
Perjury.
I, and I think Jonathan Aitken was a similar sort of thing. He was paid for questions by businesses, and it was one of those times, wasn't it, where that's what MPs did. And the silly thing is, what came out of all of that? Well, I'll tell you what came out of it. They decided that they needed to pay the MPs more.
Oh, that's so funny.
To
Listen,
stop
let's come
them.
back to this. I love this thing that you're talking about, the Jeffrey Archer mindset. So, what was the Jeffrey Archer mindset that you decided you needed to take on board?
So he basically, from the articles that I read, stripped out everything that he'd done wrong and went back to basic Jeffrey. And then knew that he had to rebuild from there. And that's what he did. He basically stripped out all the things that could be put in a bin, I suppose, and thrown away. And that's exactly what I did. I put in the bin all the bits that I'd ended up doing and made me unreliable in the face of my peers and family, and went off and carried on with all the good bits. And the good bits has always been my ability to speak to and get on with people and work with people. And I suppose it actually highlighted something that was really important to me that I didn't realize was really important to me, is I'm a really good listener. And that was the one thing that I knew that I could weigh heavy on, and it would be the making of me once I got outside, because I would sit and I would listen and I would help and I would listen to issues, and I would take stuff on board and come up with solutions. And that's not how prison works, because in prison the solution is how can you get away with as much as you can whilst being in prison. And that's your recidivist, that's your revolving door, is what can I do and what can I get away with before in the end I end up in trouble and the chances of being released go down. So you work towards that, I'm going to be released.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible. So it sounds like you decided to do a character review of
Yeah,
yourself
of
and
myself.
strip away and clear away any parts that you didn't want to carry forward into the
Yep.
future. I'm guessing you did your own assessment of what you wanted to drop, because it must have been a time, I guess, where you would have thought, what do I have to take responsibility for? Like, I'm here. How did I get here? Without feeling sorry for yourself or beating yourself up necessarily, but just like, let's just take stock of where I am and why I'm here.
Yeah. And I think the thing to do is not to dwell on so much the detail of why you were there, because ultimately life is about being judged. In the 1970s and 1980s, you were judged on what you said, and then that judgment was out in the ether for as long as it had breath. In the years 2000, 2010, right up to now, you are judged by 100 million people sitting on the other end of a laptop or a computer. And once it's out there, it doesn't go away. So the whole thing about what you did is almost irrelevant. It's about looking at your life and thinking how you can change it, and how you changing your life can help improve others and changing their lives as well. I mean, it was quite strange because I remember you coming in to see me, and I also had Mid Kent College come in to see me, where I actually went and worked when I was first released. I went to work at the college, and we soon realised that there were people within the prison system that weren't prisoners that couldn't read and write that well. And they were looking after you, and it would be, excuse me, can you help me read my letter? Go and ask somebody else. And the go and ask somebody else was because actually they couldn't read and write very well. And what actually happened was we ended up forming quite a good group where it wasn't just prisoners that came along for remedial help. It was people working within the system as well. So that in itself was quite interesting, and that sort of, I suppose, woke me up to the whole, for me, teaching, lecturing, and making people feel valued. So no matter what they did, no matter what they had, no matter where they'd come from, all those people felt valued. And the strange thing is, I still see people that I met whilst in, and they come up, they say, "Hi, how are you? How's things going? How's life?" And we chat away. And that isn't usually the sort of thing that you do when you've met people the other side of the bars. It's usually you avoid one another because it just brings back that memory of where you were. But actually, if you can turn that into something that's positive, then yeah, that works.
I think this is great, honestly, and there are people listening to this, and they really need to hear this, because so often people have something that goes wrong in life, a fall, a bankruptcy, a divorce, something, and maybe they don't end up inside and it's not so public and obvious. But, if people don't let go of, let's say, the blame, it's very hard to move forward in life. I remember I was doing this Trisha show years ago, the Trisha show, and this chap in the audience said, "I'd really like to have a chat with you." And his problem was that he'd gone bankrupt, lost his hotel business like 5 years earlier, but he just couldn't let it go. It's like the guilt, the blame, how it affected his family's life, and the guy just was frozen. And also, here's the thing, when people feel that bad about themselves, they have got to make life bad because it's like being in purgatory. I can't allow myself to have a decent life, to have a good life, because I need to pay for this. I've done bad shit and I don't deserve to have a good life. And that's exactly where he was. Does that make sense, Alan?
Absolutely. And that's exactly what happens. You start to carry it like baggage. And we know what it's like. If you go on holiday with one bag, you tend to buy another one to bring back all the baggage that you've acquired whilst you're away on holiday. And what happens is you start to associate with people that also have baggage, and then you start to take their baggage. I always giggle at the sign at the airport that says, "Did you pack your own bag?" Because actually that has always, for the last 3 years, that has been my motto to coaching is did you pack your own bag? Is there anything in this bag that you don't know about? And that is, and that is actually, that's coaching. I sit down and say to people, before we start, is there anything in this bag that you don't know about? And we spoke about this, where I go and sit down with families and friends and talk about them. And I say, listen, he says he's packed his own bag, but is there anything in that bag that he doesn't know about that you've put in there? And they go, yeah, loads. And quite often, that sort of drills away in the back. So yeah, that happens. And those sort of people tend to retain, and it's the guilt and stuff like that, which is another reason, well, what are you going to do about the guy that comes forward and says, I may not have exactly told the truth? I've already got rid of that. It's an old bag. I put it in storage. It got a bit damp. I turned up one day and said, why am I looking at this bag? Because it's no good keep looking at it. It got damp. It's rotten. So just put it in the bin it, throw it away, and start again. And I suppose, the other interesting thing was there were people there that were in their 80s and 90s. And there was one guy that was an amazing guy. And he used to go to the library every day. He'd read every single newspaper. And he'd been in and out of prison since he was 16. And he looked like Grandad off of Only Fools and Horses. He was a really highly intelligent man. But he could fake documents like you have never, ever seen. And the word is that he was out, and immediately, within about 6 months, he was back inside again. And then there was another guy that had been convicted many, 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 many years ago for murder, and didn't want to be released. And part of that was because he couldn't get rid of this baggage, and the baggage was the reason that he had nowhere to go if he was going to be released. And so he didn't want to be released. The bars and the walls had become his friend.
And what do you think? Because he felt he deserved that punishment.
Yeah, he did. And no matter how many conversations he had with the probation officers, they couldn't get over to him that he needed to let it go. He needed just to say, that's it. I just need to let this go. And I suppose that's the key to all of this. And I've had lots of discussions like this. I sit on a panel now that recruit graduate prison officers. They go and do a master's, and I sit on 6 or 7 panels a year with the Home Office, and we recruit people. And it's quite interesting because there are not just young people wanting to join. There are people that have been divorced. There are people that have lost their businesses, and they are looking at what they can do to change their life. And I suppose, when I now look back on the whole prison thing, which of course is over 20 years ago now, you suddenly think, do you know what? It's no worse than going bankrupt. It's no worse than getting a divorce. It's no worse than going through a terrible breakup in your life. It's about how you deal with it and how you get to that mindset place. And that either happens whilst you're still in the relationship, where you decide that's it, or it happens sort of shortly after. But, it is difficult. It's not easy. And I appreciate that. For me, I was lucky. And I was surrounded by some great people within the system who allowed me.
Hold on a second, here's the thing. Anybody that comes across you and hears about your life, they could be tempted to say, there's always a lucky one. I mean, he's lucky. But look, what I'm hearing, what everybody must be hearing, is that you made a decision. You undoubtedly had a dark night of the soul moment, and probably quite a few. And in that moment, and in that time, you made a decision.
Yeah.
And your decision was, I'm going to make this time matter. I'm going to make this time work. I'm going to take a cold, hard look at myself. I'm going to evaluate what needs to go, how I need to be better. And I'm going to help other people. I'm going to make this experience valuable, useful. That's a decision. That's not luck. And then everything unfolds from there. Look, you took the decision. You took the decision to read self-improvement books. I'm sure you were reading other books apart from Be Your Own Life Coach, but you took a decision to write a letter back in the days when we just had letters. And, you wrote to me, and you initiated this incredible chain of events that meant you had this ripple effect on so many people's lives, and you initiated that. So I think we get lucky when we get into life and we dedicate our life to something more and bigger than just our personal gain.
Yeah.
And maybe, and I don't know this, Alan, but do you think that you developed and changed as a human being? Do you think that maybe your life in the 90s as a yuppie, do you think maybe that life was primarily about ambition and drive and personal gain, and therefore you changed afterwards.
Yeah, I think we are all products of circumstance. I think we're all products of what goes on in the outside world. I think in the 90s, we could look around. There was, I mean, I had a mobile phone that resembled a brick, that I had to ask to put on charge when I went into restaurants, because if anybody called me, it would run out a good 15 minutes after I'd got there. I had a nice car. I mean, I had all these things, but actually, um, you what you really need is to be at one and at peace with yourself. And I can never honestly say that I was there. I think that um, me wanting to work with people once I'd got out was really important. It was important for me because I'd seen something that I never thought I'd see, um, when you're working in that sort of high flying industry. And when all of a sudden, you know, the fall from grace occurs, you do have to reevaluate it really, really quickly. And when you're there, when you finally come out, I mean, I was paid the greatest compliment um, over Christmas by a relative, um, who I love dearly. He is such a nice man, and he said, "Alan, you are one of the best networkers I've ever met in my life." Um, he said, "You can walk into a room." And you can talk about most of the people that were in that room by the time you leave, and you know things about them that they may not even know about themselves. And it was a lovely thing to be told. But really, that's what I've built my business on. We joked and laughed. I have the tattoo question. I get in a room full of people and I talk to them about who has tattoos, who doesn't have tattoos. And by the end of sort of 3 or 4 days sessions, without them telling me, I will go around the room and I will tell people who have tattoos and who don't have tattoos, hidden, because it would be silly if they're sitting there with one on the arm. And I get it about 98% time right. And that's because tattoos are a product of the world that we live in, and the product of the people that we wanted to be or still want to be, and sort of that. So I love that approach. um and I think, if I'm honest, whether or not I'd gone inside, I think I'd have ended up doing that anyway, in a weird sort of way, because it brings something. It makes you feel good. Working with people just make you know this, Fiona. It makes you feel good. There is nothing better than having the CEO of one of the businesses that I work with ring me and go, "We got it. We did it. Thank you for all your help." And I say, "I didn't build it. I didn't do the pitch. I didn't do any of that. But yeah, but you were sat there and we could ring you day or night. And even if you weren't going to talk about, the business, you were there to talk to." And I suppose that's sort of where life takes us. And I enjoy that. And that's sort of my business now.
I love it. I love it. Honestly, in a way, your experience of being in prison, and we'll wrap this up in a second. I know you're busy. In a way, your experience of being in prison gives you this incredible platform to speak from, right? Because look, everybody's goes through difficult times, but let's be honest, having your liberty and your freedom taken away and actually being incarcerated, that's like another stage altogether, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you're pretty good at making light of it, but holy smolies, anybody listening to this, that's another level altogether. But look, there you are in that place, and what you're sharing with us works because you applied it, It got you through that time, and it's got you this incredible life today. Well, you're probably happier, I would say, than you were when you were that yuppie in the
Yeah.
90s,
Oh, gotcha.
right? So look, for
Yeah.
everybody listening to this, we all go through hard times, and what I'm hearing is the most important thing, number one, is to make a decision as to how you are going to proceed at this point onwards, right? And the number two thing that I've heard you say, Alan, is um, be honest. Be honest. Take an inventory of yourself, your character, your behavior, and let go, discard what needs to go that doesn't serve you, isn't good. So you clearly decided to make yourself a better person going forward, Alan. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's quite interesting what you say about look at yourself. Um, I met an elderly gentleman about 5 years ago that I sort of bring up now in a lot of what I do. And he was an auditor for a brewery, actually for a pub chain. And he could walk into a pub and he could look at optics and tell you how many shots were left in each of the bottles. And then he would say, there's your income. That's mostly tied pubs. There's your income. That's what you've got left. Somebody behind the bar is stealing.
Whoa.
And I'd be like, what? How? Just
Yeah.
it's very easy. He said,
Yeah.
very easy. And that is it. You know, it's sometimes we need the auditor to come in and help us take stock of where we are.
Mhm.
And I suppose that's what my experience taught me is I needed to bring auditors in, and they helped me to take stock of where I was
Mhm.
and what I needed to do to go forward.
Mhm.
And that is sort of the route that I now take with most of the businesses and with the individuals. I
Mhm.
go in and I become their auditor.
Mhm. Mhm. But in a way, there you were isolated in prison, and you did your own audit, didn't you? You
Yes,
took appraisal of yourself, right? That dark night of the soul moment that everybody's been through, when you got to take a hard, cold look at yourself.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. But then I brought the auditors in the shape of yourself, um, Sharon, that worked up the top of the hill, and they came in and they sort of help you to audit.
mm, mm. Well, that's a humility right there. That's a humility right there. You know, which is you saying, "I've taken a look at myself. Take a look and see what you're saying in case I'm missing anything." Um, and then the third thing is you got busy. I mean, you got busy. Like, you must have been working harder inside prison than you ever worked outside, because you're working with everybody and making things happen. And you are this phenomenal networker. There's no question, you know. You were such a key figure inside a place of confinement, right? A lot of people might think, well, I want to have influence. I want to make things happen, but, and they're always looking at the restrictions, right? I mean, it doesn't get much more restricted than a flipping prison cell.
No, no,
So,
friendly, but not friends. That is the
yeah.
terminology. Yeah, but there's nothing stopping you being friendly. There's nothing
What,
stopping you talking
what,
to people.
one thing you would say for anyone listening is to how to make things happen when life isn't perfect, when there are restrictions. How do you make things happen?
Yeah, I think you have to look deep into yourself, um, and that does seem very easy to say, but as we sort of said earlier on, it's also about um, not trying to fit into other people's models or perceptions of where you think and they think you should be. It's all right to have, people come to me and say, "Oh, my husband tells me I've got FOMO, or my wife tells me I've got FOMO. I really have this fear of missing out all the time." And I say to them, "Listen, that's good. That's good to a certain extent to have that fear of missing out, but it's got to be something that actually you want to do. It's no good having a fear of missing out climbing Kilimanjaro if you have no intention of ever wanting to, or never want to climb Kilimanjaro. So it's, yeah, sometimes you have to look deep into yourself and make those assessments. And sometimes other people know you better than you do. And always reach out, ask people, what, so, I've done this, I've done that, I just don't seem to be getting anywhere. What is my problem? Well, perhaps the problem is, I mean, one of the biggest things with working with prisoners is, I've written to my wife 3 times this week, and she hasn't replied once. Okay. So obviously there's something going on. Right. Number one, you're sat in here all day writing her letters while she's at home looking after 3 kids, a house, and a job whilst you're here. And number two, in any of the letters, did you ask her how she was? And they go, no, because maybe I just want to talk about me and where I am. So that's a big thing. Once you're there, how is it for you? I realize what I've done has made an enormous impact. Is there anything I can do to change that? And you can, forget the prison life now. Just look at life. Let's look at that going forward. How am I doing? Is there anything that you wish I would have done or could have done, or is there something I can help you with? Because actually, for a lot of people, that very rarely is the case. They don't actually have people come and ask them that question. And that, and that is really is key. You need to ask about others. And that's what makes networking so good. Gives you that opportunity to ask others. And for every person and every answer, there's always something that you can take away.
Yeah, because look, the thing that you were so successful at in prison was getting buy-in to your idea, getting other people to go, okay. I mean, you got people to say yes to our idea of training prison officers to have coaching skills. I don't know how you did that, but you did it. So, the way that we get ahead in life really is through the cooperation of other people.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the key? What really worked for you? How the heck does one get other people's buy-in? Let's be honest, you were a prisoner at the time. So on the food chain, you were not at the highest rung, right? Now people take your calls. You could probably reach just about anybody, let's be honest. So, but back in the day, you're inside, you're on the lowest rung. How do you get buy-in? How do you get people going, yes, let's make this happen, Alan. Good idea.
Well, I think that comes back to how you treat others. You treat others how you want to be treated yourself. And sometimes the discussions can be had. There isn't a them and us relationship. It has to be all of us. I mean, after all, at the end of the day, and I always used to say this to everybody, you go back to your cell or your room, depending on where you are, you close the door, you watch television, and you go to sleep at 10 o'clock. The officers have to go home. They have to deal with life that's going on outside of there. They have to pay bills. They have to deal with kids. They have to deal with relationships, mortgages, overgrown gardens, all those things. Sometimes, friendly, not friends. Why not talk about, most officers would open up and would talk to you without being friends. They will say, yeah, I mean, for me, it was always easy. I'd say, oh, do you live on the island? And they go, yeah. The last thing I'd ever want to do on this island of a weekend if I'm off is do gardening. And they look at you and go, oh, no. And talk about gardening. You don't have to be talking about incarceration, the system, the legal system. And also, a lot of these officers want to do stuff. They don't just want to stay walking the landings forever. So this, to a certain extent, was giving them access to a something they'd mostly never considered. Yeah, it came from me, but ultimately it didn't really matter who it came from. I could have typed it up and put it in an anonymous suggestion for the governor. He'd have read it and made out that it had come from him. It wouldn't have mattered. What mattered was they got what they were looking for. And yeah, it brought a lot of people together. And it also, you know what, it also kerneled around respect. People were respecting one another. And that was a really great thing as well. You know, that was really key. There was a certain respect, and that was great.
I think people are going to take away so much from this, Alan. And again, I think that your message is actually all the more potent and all the more powerful because you are speaking from that experience. You're speaking from that enforced time of having to face yourself, and at a low point in your life, think, how can I make my life work from this place? You know, so for anyone listening to this, I am so hoping you're going to take away from this these key takeaways. Make the decision. Do the analysis. What needs to change? How do I need to change? How do I need to be better going forward? And then the getting into action. The getting into action. I love it. Is there any one last message that you would say to somebody listening to this, Alan?
Resilience. That's the key. Be resilient. Don't just be resilient for yourself. Be resilient also for your clients. Be there.
How do you do that? How do you do that? Because I agree, but how?
I think you build an inner strength that relies exclusively on you and your experiences, and you, by sharing your experiences, you enable them to become more resilient. And we sort of joked before we went live about being philosophical. My glass is never, ever, ever half empty. It's never been half empty my whole life. But I just needed to learn what to put in the glass. It's no good, you know. And what I had in the glass pre-year 2000 was not the right stuff. So now what I've got in the glass is the right stuff. And that's what that's about.
And just one last thing that I'm hearing from you is I really feel like you've never, maybe for about 5 minutes once, but what I'm hearing is that you never felt sorry for yourself. Like you never were a victim. You never thought, oh, this is terrible. How could this happen to me? You were just like, okay, here's where I am, and here's what I need to do. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Never, ever, ever, never feel like you're a victim. And that can be very easy to say, but you know, I didn't want to feel like a victim. That just would have delayed everything, and it wouldn't have put me in the right frame of mind. I didn't need to be a victim. I needed to be internally. I needed to be a part of the solution, and a part of the solution was not being a victim. 100%.
Love it. Love it. For a lot of people, that might be the most important thing they've heard in this whole conversation. Thank you so much, Alan. You're amazing. I love you. Thank you. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you.
No, thank you.